The morning sun pushed through the thin curtains of a small apartment in Osaka, Japan. The light fell across a narrow room where an 8-year-old boy named Kenji Nakamura was already awake. He sat on his futon, eyes closed, moving his fingers in the air like he was touching invisible keys. His lips moved silently as he hummed a tune that only he could hear. Below the apartment, the sounds of the city were starting to wake up. Cars honked in the distance. The neighbors were opening their shop shutters. The smell of miso soup drifted up from the noodle restaurant on the ground floor. That restaurant belonged to Kenji's family. It was small and old, but it had been there for many years. Kenji's mother called from the kitchen. Her voice was gentle but tired. She had been awake since 5 in the morning, preparing for the breakfast customers. Kenji quickly folded his futon and placed it in the corner of the room. He walked to the small bathroom and washed his face with cold water. The mirror showed a thin boy with dark hair that stuck up in places. His school uniform was laid out on a chair, clean but worn from years of use. In the kitchen, his mother placed a bowl of rice and some pickled vegetables on the low table. She smiled at Kenji, but he could see the lines of worry on her face. His father had already left for work at the factory. He worked 12 hours every day, sometimes more. The factory made car parts, and his father's hands were always covered in small cuts and oil stains. Kenji ate his breakfast slowly. His mother sat across from him, drinking green tea and looking at a stack of bills on the table. She sighed quietly and put the papers away when she noticed Kenji watching. She reached over and touched his cheek with her rough hand. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. Kenji nodded. He wanted to tell her about the music in his head, about the melodies that woke him up every morning, but he knew she had enough to worry about. Money was always tight. There was never enough for extras. Music lessons were something only rich families could afford. After breakfast, Kenji picked up his worn backpack and headed out. His mother was already tying her apron, ready to help in the restaurant below. She kissed the top of his head as he passed. The walk to school took 20 minutes. Kenji liked this time alone. He walked past the same shops every day, and each one had its own rhythm. The bakery had the sound of the oven door opening and closing. The bicycle repair shop had the ping of metal tools. The flower shop had wind chimes that sang in the breeze. Kenji listened to all of it and made music in his mind, but there was one place he always stopped. It was a small music store called Tanaka Music. The store had a big window, and through that window Kenji could see the most beautiful thing in the world: a piano. It was black and shiny, and it sat in the middle of the store like a treasure. Every morning Kenji pressed his nose against the glass and stared at that piano. Sometimes, if he was lucky, he would see someone playing it. There was a girl about his age who came for lessons every Tuesday. She wore a fancy school uniform with a blue ribbon. Her mother always brought her in a car. The girl would sit at the piano and play scales while her teacher, a strict-looking woman with glasses, counted the beats. Kenji watched through the window, memorizing the way the girl's fingers moved. He noticed which keys she pressed for each sound. He saw how her hands curved and how her back stayed straight. Even though he couldn't hear the music through the glass, he could imagine it. Later, he would hum the melodies he thought she was playing. One day, the store owner noticed him. She was an old woman named Mrs. Tanaka. She had gray hair tied in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She came to the window and waved at Kenji. He jumped back, embarrassed to be caught staring. But Mrs. Tanaka just smiled and made a gesture like playing the piano. Then she pointed at him and gave a thumbs up. From that day on, Mrs. Tanaka would wave at Kenji every morning. Sometimes she would play a few notes on the display piano just for him. Kenji would grin and wave back before running off to school. Those few seconds of connection made him feel like maybe someday, music could be part of his life too. At school, Kenji was quiet. He sat in the back of the classroom and did his work without causing trouble. The other children didn't pay much attention to him. He wasn't good at sports like some boys. He wasn't funny or loud. He was just there, existing in his own small space. During lunch, the other kids played games in the yard. Some played soccer. Others traded cards or toys. Kenji usually sat under a tree by himself. He would eat his simple lunch of rice balls and vegetables that his mother packed for him. While he ate, he tapped rhythms on his knee with his chopsticks. The patterns matched songs in his head. One day, a teacher named Mr. Hayashi noticed Kenji sitting alone. Mr. Hayashi was young and wore colorful ties that the students liked. He taught mathematics but seemed interested in everything. He sat down next to Kenji under the tree. "You're always by yourself," Mr. Hayashi said. "Don't you want to play with the others?" Kenji shrugged. He didn't know how to explain that he was never really alone. He had music with him all the time. "What are you thinking about?" Mr. Hayashi asked. "Music," Kenji said softly. Mr. Hayashi looked surprised. "Do you play an instrument?" Kenji shook his head. "No, but I hear music everywhere." Mr. Hayashi tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" Kenji pointed at the playground. "The swings make a creaking sound. It's like a rhythm. And when the wind blows through the fence, it makes a humming sound. And the bell that rings for class has a certain note. I remember all the sounds and make songs with them in my head." Mr. Hayashi stared at Kenji for a long moment. Then he smiled. "That's a wonderful gift, Kenji. Have you ever told your parents about this?" Kenji looked down. "My parents work very hard. We don't have money for music things." Mr. Hayashi nodded slowly. He understood. Many families in this neighborhood struggled. But he made a mental note about this unusual boy who heard music in everything. After school, Kenji didn't go straight home. His mother was busy at the restaurant, and she had told him to stay out and play until dinner time. But Kenji didn't play. Instead, he wandered through the neighborhood collecting sounds. He stopped at a construction site and listened to the rhythm of hammers hitting nails. He stood near a train crossing and felt the rumble as the trains passed. He visited a small park where mothers pushed their babies in swings, creating a steady back-and-forth squeak. All of these sounds went into his memory, stored away like precious gems. Sometimes Kenji would sit on the steps of a closed store and use 2 sticks to tap out rhythms on the concrete. Old people walking by would smile at him. Some thought he was just a playful child. But Kenji was practicing, learning to control rhythm and timing without even knowing the proper words for what he was doing. One afternoon, Kenji discovered something new. He found that if he tapped on different surfaces, they made different sounds. A metal railing rang like a bell. A wooden fence made a hollow thunk. A plastic bucket created a sharp tap. He spent an hour creating a whole song using just the things he found on the street. A shopkeeper came out and watched him for a while. The man was amused by this serious little boy treating trash and street furniture like instruments. When Kenji finished his improvised concert, the shopkeeper clapped his hands. "You should be in a band," the man joked. Kenji looked up at him and said with complete seriousness, "I want to play the piano." The shopkeeper's smile faded a bit. He looked at Kenji's worn clothes and knew that pianos were not for children like him. "Maybe someday," he said gently. "Keep dreaming, kid." But Kenji didn't just dream. Every night before bed, he practiced on an imaginary piano. He would sit cross-legged on his futon and place his hands in front of him as if there were keys beneath his fingers. He would press down, imagining the sound each note would make. His mother would peek into his room and see him there, completely focused, playing music that didn't exist. She would feel her heart break a little. She wished she could give him what he wanted. She wished she could afford lessons or even a small keyboard. But every coin they earned went to rent, food, and keeping the restaurant running. There was nothing left over for dreams. One night, Kenji's father came home very late. He was so tired he could barely stand. But he saw Kenji practicing his invisible piano and stopped in the doorway. He watched his son's dedicated movements, the concentration on his young face. After Kenji finished and lay down to sleep, his father sat with his wife at the kitchen table. "He really loves music," his father said quietly. "I know," his mother replied. "But what can we do?" His father rubbed his tired eyes. "I don't know. Maybe when things get better." But things didn't get better. The factory reduced his father's hours. The restaurant had fewer customers because a new noodle shop opened 2 streets over. Money got tighter. The stack of bills on the kitchen table grew taller. Kenji noticed these things. He saw his mother's worried face. He saw his father's exhausted walks. He stopped asking questions about music. He stopped talking about the piano in the store window. He kept his dreams locked inside his heart where they couldn't add to his parents' burdens. But the music never stopped. In his head, melodies continued to form and grow. He couldn't control it any more than he could control breathing. Music was simply part of who he was, whether he had an instrument or not. At night, lying in his small room, Kenji would look at the ceiling and imagine himself sitting at a grand piano in a big concert hall. He imagined his fingers flying across the keys. He imagined people listening and feeling the emotions he put into every note. It seemed impossible, like dreaming about flying to the moon. But the dream was so strong, so vivid that it felt real. Kenji didn't know it then, but his life was about to change. In just a few weeks, something would happen that would put him on a path he never imagined possible. But for now, he was just a poor boy in Osaka who loved music more than anything else in the world. The neighborhood continued its daily rhythm around him. The noodle shop steamed and bubbled. The factory machines whirred and clanked. The music store piano gleamed in the window, and Kenji walked through it all, listening, learning, and waiting for his chance. That chance was coming sooner than anyone knew. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Kenji's mother made a decision that would change everything. She had been worrying about Kenji spending so much time alone on the streets after school. The neighborhood was safe, but she didn't like the idea of her son wandering around with nothing to do while she worked in the restaurant below. She had heard about a community center a few blocks away. It was a place where children could go after school. They would be supervised and could do homework or play games. The cost was very small, much less than a babysitter. After counting the coins in her savings jar 3 times, she decided they could afford it. That evening, she told Kenji about the community center. He listened quietly as she explained. At first, he felt worried. He liked his afternoon walks. He liked collecting sounds from the neighborhood. But he saw hope in his mother's eyes, hope that he would be safe and maybe make some friends. He didn't want to disappoint her. "Okay, Mama," he said. "I'll go." His mother smiled and hugged him tight. She smelled like cooking oil and soup broth, familiar and comforting. "You'll like it there," she promised. "There are many children your age. You can play games and do fun activities." The next day after school, Kenji's mother walked him to the community center. It was in an old building that had once been a factory warehouse. The walls were gray concrete, and some of the windows had cracks covered with tape. A faded sign above the door read Sakura Community Center in both Japanese and English. Inside, the main hall was large and echoing. The floor was covered in worn linoleum that had turned yellow with age. Folding tables were scattered around where children sat doing homework or playing board games. In one corner, some kids were building with blocks. In another corner, teenagers were playing ping pong on a table with a bent net. The director of the center was a man named Mr. Yoshida. He was in his 60s with a round belly and kind eyes behind thick glasses. His shirt was always a bit wrinkled, and he had a habit of adjusting his glasses when he talked. He greeted Kenji's mother warmly and shook Kenji's hand like he was an adult. "Welcome, Kenji," Mr. Yoshida said. "We're happy to have you here. You can do your homework at any of the tables, or you can join the other children in activities. We have art supplies, games, and books. Make yourself at home." Kenji's mother thanked Mr. Yoshida and kissed Kenji on the forehead before leaving. Kenji stood in the middle of the big room, feeling small and uncertain. The other children glanced at him but quickly went back to what they were doing. Nobody came over to introduce themselves. Kenji found an empty chair at a table and pulled out his homework. He tried to focus on his math problems, but his attention kept drifting. The room was full of sounds. Children's voices bounced off the concrete walls. The ping-pong ball made a rhythmic tap-tap-tap. Someone dropped a box of blocks with a loud crash. All these sounds mixed together in Kenji's head, forming patterns and rhythms. Then he heard something else, or rather he noticed the absence of something. In the far corner of the hall, behind a stack of old chairs and some boxes, there was a shape covered with a dusty sheet. Kenji's heart began to beat faster. That shape looked familiar. He put down his pencil and walked across the hall. A few children watched him go but said nothing. Kenji reached the corner and stood in front of the covered object. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the edge of the sheet. It was a piano. Kenji's breath caught in his throat. The piano was old and damaged. The wood was scratched and faded. Some of the white keys were yellowed like old teeth and a few were cracked. The black keys had chips in them. When Kenji touched the fallboard that covered the keys, it was sticky with decades of dust and grime. But it was a piano. A real piano. His hands shaking with excitement, Kenji lifted the fallboard. The keys were revealed, sitting in their rows like a smile with missing teeth. Some keys were lower than others. Some looked like they might not work at all, but Kenji didn't care. This was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He looked around quickly to see if anyone was watching. Mr. Yoshida was helping a young girl with her homework. The other children were busy with their own activities. Nobody seemed to care about this forgotten piano in the corner. Kenji pulled out the bench. It wobbled on uneven legs. He sat down carefully, his feet barely touching the floor. He looked at the keys for a long moment, afraid to touch them, afraid they might disappear like a dream. Then, gently, he pressed down on middle C. The note that came out was dull and slightly out of tune. But to Kenji it was the most wonderful sound in the world. It was real. It existed outside of his imagination. His eyes filled with tears, he pressed another key, then another. Some keys didn't make any sound at all. Their hammers were broken or their strings were missing. Other keys stuck down when he pressed them and had to be pulled back up. The whole piano was terribly out of tune, with some notes sounding almost like different pitches than they should be. But Kenji didn't see a broken piano. He saw possibility. He saw a chance to finally touch real music instead of just imagining it. His fingers moved over the keys, testing each one, memorizing which ones worked and which ones didn't. "Hey kid, what are you doing?" Kenji jumped and turned around. An older boy, maybe 12 or 13, was standing behind him with his arms crossed. He had a mean look on his face. I was just... Kenji stammered. "That piano is junk," the older boy said. "It doesn't even work right. Nobody plays it. You're wasting your time." "But some keys work," Kenji said quietly. The older boy laughed. "So what? You don't even know how to play. You're just banging on keys like a baby." He walked away, still laughing. Kenji felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. But when he looked back at the piano, the feeling faded. The older boy was wrong. This wasn't junk. This was a treasure. From that day on, Kenji spent every afternoon at the community center. He would finish his homework as quickly as possible, then go to the corner where the piano waited for him. At first, the other children made fun of him. They called him names and laughed at the broken sounds the piano made. But Kenji ignored them. He was too focused on learning. He taught himself to play by using only the keys that worked. If a melody needed a note that was broken, he would find a different note that sounded okay instead. He learned to work around the piano's problems, creating music despite the instrument's limitations. Mr. Yoshida watched this happen day after day. At first, he barely noticed. The piano had been donated years ago by someone who didn't want it anymore. It was too expensive to repair, and the center didn't have money for such things. Mr. Yoshida had planned to throw it away eventually, but he never got around to it. Now, seeing this quiet boy spend hours at the broken instrument, he became curious. One afternoon, Mr. Yoshida walked over to where Kenji was sitting. The boy was so focused on the keys that he didn't notice the director approaching. "Kenji, Mr." Yoshida said softly, not wanting to startle him. Kenji looked up, his hands frozen over the keys. "I'm sorry. Am I being too loud?" No, Mr. Yoshida said quickly. He sat down on a nearby chair, which creaked under his weight. "I just wanted to ask, where did you learn to play piano?" Kenji looked down. "I didn't learn. I'm just trying things." "Just trying things?" Mr. Yoshida adjusted his glasses. "But you're making real music. I've been listening. How do you know which keys to press?" Kenji thought about how to explain it. "I hear the music in my head first. Then I try to find those sounds on the piano. Sometimes it's hard because some keys are broken. So I have to find different ways to make the song work." Mr. Yoshida was amazed. "You've never had lessons? Never learned to read music?" Kenji shook his head. "My family doesn't have money for lessons. I just really love music." Mr. Yoshida sat back in his chair and looked at this small, quiet boy with new understanding. He had worked at the community center for 15 years. He had seen hundreds of children come through those doors, but he had never seen anything like this. This boy was teaching himself music on a broken piano, using nothing but his own ear and determination. "Keep playing, Kenji," Mr. Yoshida said finally. "This piano may be broken, but you're bringing it back to life." Kenji smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. "Really? I can keep playing?" "Yes. This piano is yours to use whenever you're here." From that moment, the broken piano became Kenji's teacher. Every afternoon he would sit on that wobbly bench and explore. He started to recognize patterns in music. He understood that certain keys sounded good together while others clashed. He learned about rhythm by tapping his foot and counting in his head. He learned about melody by remembering songs he had heard and trying to recreate them. The piano had 43 working keys out of 88. That meant Kenji had to be creative. He couldn't play songs the way they were meant to be played. He had to adapt everything. If a song went too high or too low, he would change it to fit the working keys. If a chord needed a broken note, he would find a substitute. This forced him to really understand music, not just copy it. Other children began to stop their games and listen when Kenji played. At first, they had mocked him. But as weeks passed, they started to notice that real music was coming from that corner. It didn't sound like the recordings on the radio. It was different, strange, but somehow beautiful. A girl named Yuki, who was 9 years old, started to sit near Kenji while he played. She didn't talk to him. She just sat and listened. After a while, other children joined her. They would do their homework at the table closest to the piano, working quietly while Kenji filled the space with his imperfect melodies. Mr. Yoshida began to look forward to hearing Kenji play. During stressful moments of his day, when children were fighting or parents complained about something, he would listen for the sound of the piano. Even with its broken keys and out-of-tune strings, the music that Kenji created had a quality that touched something deep inside. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was pure. One day, a teacher from the local elementary school came to pick up her daughter from the center. While she waited, she heard piano music. She followed the sound to the corner where Kenji sat, completely absorbed in his playing. She stood there for several minutes, listening in disbelief. When Kenji finished, she approached him. "Young man, who is your piano teacher?" Kenji looked up at her with confused eyes. "I don't have a teacher." "But you must. Someone taught you to play like that." "No, ma'am, I teach myself." The teacher turned to Mr. Yoshida, who had walked over. "Is this true?" Mr. Yoshida nodded. "He's been coming here for 2 months now. Every day he plays that old piano. Nobody taught him. He just figured it out." The teacher looked back at Kenji with wonder. "Do you know that piano is broken? Many of the keys don't work." "Yes, ma'am, but some of them do." "That's enough." The teacher shook her head in amazement. "You have a gift, young man. A real gift." She said goodbye and left with her daughter, but Kenji could see her looking back at him through the window with a thoughtful expression. That night, Kenji told his parents about the piano. They were eating a simple dinner of rice, miso soup, and pickled vegetables. His father was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. His mother was calculating bills in her head even while eating. But they both stopped and listened when Kenji spoke with more excitement than they had heard in months. "There's a piano at the community center," he said, the words tumbling out. "It's old and broken, but I can play it. Mr. Yoshida said I can use it every day. I'm teaching myself songs. It's wonderful, Mama. It's really wonderful." His mother smiled, and some of the worry lifted from her face. "I'm so happy for you, Kenji. You finally get to play real piano." His father reached over and ruffled Kenji's hair with his rough hand. "My son, the piano player," he said with pride in his tired voice. That night, Kenji lay in his small room with happiness filling his chest. He had a real piano to play now. It didn't matter that it was broken. It didn't matter that it was hidden in a corner of a rundown community center. It was his, in a way. His to learn from. His to love. He fell asleep with his fingers still, moving slightly, practicing melodies on invisible keys, already planning what he would play tomorrow. 4 months had passed since Kenji first discovered the broken piano. The cold winds of November were blowing through Osaka, and the community center had become Kenji's second home. Every afternoon after school, he would rush through the doors, quickly finish his homework, and spend the rest of his time at the piano. His fingers had become stronger, and his understanding of music had grown deeper with each passing day. The other regular children at the center had gotten used to Kenji's presence. Some of them genuinely enjoyed listening to him play. Others ignored him completely. But nobody made fun of him anymore. Even the older boy who had called the piano junk had stopped his teasing. There was something in Kenji's dedication that commanded a quiet respect, even from those who didn't understand music. Mr. Yoshida had noticed Kenji's progress with amazement. The boy was creating increasingly complex melodies despite the piano's limitations. Sometimes Mr. Yoshida would close his eyes and listen, forgetting that the music came from a broken instrument played by an untrained 8-year-old. It seemed impossible, yet it happened every day. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, something different was going to happen. Something that would test Kenji in ways he had never imagined. The morning started normally. Kenji went to school, stopped briefly at the music store window to see Mrs. Tanaka and her beautiful piano, and attended his classes. He could barely concentrate during math and science. His mind was already at the community center, thinking about a new melody he wanted to try. When the school bell finally rang, Kenji practically ran to the community center. He burst through the doors, breathless and excited, but Mr. Yoshida stopped him before he could go to his usual corner. "Kenji, wait a moment," Mr. Yoshida said. He looked nervous about something. "I need to tell you something." Kenji's heart sank. Was something wrong? Was the piano going to be thrown away after all? "There's a group of boys coming today from Sakura Elite Academy," Mr. Yoshida explained. Sakura Elite Academy was a famous private school for wealthy families. The students wore expensive uniforms and came to school in cars driven by chauffeurs. It's part of their community service program. They have to volunteer at places like our center to learn about helping others. Kenji nodded, not understanding why this mattered. Mr. Yoshida adjusted his glasses, a sign that he was worried. These boys, they come from very different backgrounds than the children here. Sometimes they can be unkind. They don't always understand how lucky they are. He put his hand on Kenji's shoulder. "If anyone gives you trouble, you come tell me right away, okay?" "Okay," Kenji said, still confused but wanting to get to the piano. The boys from Sakura Elite Academy arrived an hour later. There were 5 of them, all around 12 or 13 years old. They wore crisp uniforms with gold buttons and the school crest embroidered on their blazers. Their shoes were polished to a shine. Their hair was perfectly styled. They looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Their teacher, a thin woman with gray hair pulled back tightly, led them into the center. She spoke to Mr. Yoshida quietly, while the boys looked around the shabby room with obvious disdain. One of them wrinkled his nose. Another whispered something to his friend, and they both laughed. Mr. Yoshida tried to welcome them warmly. "Thank you for coming to help us today. We have some cleaning tasks, and perhaps you could help the younger children with their homework." The boys nodded without enthusiasm. Their teacher gave them a stern look that said, "Behave yourselves." Then she left, saying she would return in 2 hours to collect them. As soon as she was gone, the boys' behavior changed. They slouched in their chairs. They made jokes about the old furniture and the cracked walls. They treated the younger children at the center with barely concealed contempt. The leader of the group was a boy named Takeshi. He was tall for his age, with perfectly styled black hair and an expensive watch on his wrist. His father was Hiroshi Yamamoto, one of Japan's most famous concert pianists. Takeshi had been trained on the finest piano since he was 3 years old. His home had a grand piano worth more than most people's cars. Takeshi was bored. He didn't want to be at this dirty community center with these poor children. This whole community service requirement was stupid, in his opinion. He was supposed to clean. His family had servants who did that. He was supposed to help kids with homework. He had private tutors who helped him. He wandered around the center with his friends, making mean comments about everything he saw. He criticized the old books in the reading corner. He laughed at the board games with missing pieces. He mocked the ping-pong table with its bent net. Then he heard it. Piano music. His head turned sharply. Someone was playing piano. Here? In this dump? The music was strange, not quite right somehow, but it was definitely piano music. Against his will, he felt curious. He walked toward the sound, his 4 friends following behind him. In the corner, partially hidden behind some boxes and chairs, Takeshi saw the old piano. And sitting at it was a small boy, maybe 8 years old, dressed in a worn school uniform that was too big for him. The boy's fingers moved over the keys with complete concentration. His eyes were closed, and he seemed to be in another world. Takeshi stopped and listened for a moment. The music was not terrible. It was weird with strange gaps and unexpected notes, but there was something almost interesting about it. Then Takeshi looked more closely at the piano and understood. The piano was broken. Many keys clearly didn't work. The sound was terrible. A mean smile spread across Takeshi's face. This was too perfect. Here was this poor little kid playing on a piano that should have been thrown in the garbage years ago. This would be entertaining. Kenji was so absorbed in his playing that he didn't notice the 5 boys approaching. He was working on a melody he had been thinking about all day. The broken keys forced him to make adjustments, but he was getting better at finding creative solutions. The music flowed through him like water, natural and necessary. "Hey," Takeshi's voice cut through the air like a knife. "What are you doing?" Kenji's hands froze on the keys. He opened his eyes and turned around slowly. 5 boys in fancy uniforms stood behind him, looking down at him with expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. The tallest one, the one who had spoken, had his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. I was playing piano," Kenji said quietly. Takeshi laughed and his friends joined in. "Playing piano? Is that what you call it? It sounds like a dying cat." Kenji felt his face grow hot. He looked down at the keys and said nothing. "Do you even know what you're doing?" Takeshi continued, stepping closer. "Or are you just banging randomly on keys like a monkey?" One of Takeshi's friends, a chubby boy with glasses, pointed at the piano. "Look at this thing. Half the keys don't even work. It's total junk. Why would anyone waste their time on it?" Another friend added, "My dog's toy piano sounds better than this." They all laughed together. By now, other children in the community center had stopped what they were doing. They watched nervously. Some of them felt bad for Kenji, but they were too afraid of these rich older boys to say anything. Yuki, the 9-year-old girl who liked to listen to Kenji play, stood up from her table. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice shaking but brave. "He plays beautifully." Takeshi turned to look at her, his eyebrow raised. "Beautifully? Are you deaf?" "This is not beautiful. This is noise." He turned back to Kenji. "Has anyone ever told you the truth, kid? You're wasting your time. Real piano requires real talent and real training, not just some poor kid pecking at a broken piano." Kenji felt tears starting to form in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He stood up from the bench, ready to walk away. This was too much. These boys were right. What was he doing? He had no training. He had no teacher. He was just a poor boy pretending to be something he wasn't. But Takeshi wasn't done. An idea had formed in his cruel mind. An idea that would provide entertainment for his bored afternoon. "Wait," he said, putting his hand on Kenji's shoulder. "Don't leave. I have a better idea." Kenji stopped, feeling the weight of that hand like a threat. Takeshi raised his voice so everyone in the center could hear. "I want to give you a chance. A real chance. Why don't you play something for all of us? A real performance. Show us what you can do on your instrument." The way he said instrument made it clear he thought the broken piano was anything but. Kenji shook his head. "No, thank you." "No? Why not?" Takeshi's smile grew wider. "Are you afraid? Or do you finally realize that you don't actually know how to play? He doesn't have to prove anything to you," Yuki said loudly. A few other children murmured in agreement. Takeshi ignored them. He kept his eyes on Kenji. "I'll tell you what. If you play for us and if it's actually good, I'll apologize. I'll admit I was wrong. But if it's bad," he paused dramatically, "then you have to admit that you're just a pretender. You have to promise to stop wasting everyone's time with this noise." "That's not fair," a boy named Hiroshi called out. He was one of the regular children who had become friends with Kenji over the months. "He doesn't have to do anything you say." Mr. Yoshida had been in his office during all this, but the raised voices brought him out. He saw the scene immediately. The wealthy boys surrounding Kenji, the other children looking worried, and Kenji himself standing frozen like a trapped animal. "What's going on here?" Mr. Yoshida demanded, walking quickly toward them. Takeshi put on an innocent face. "Nothing, sir. I just asked this boy if he would play piano for us. I'd love to hear him play." "We all would." He gestured to the room. "Right, everyone?" Some children nodded, confused. Others stayed silent. Mr. Yoshida looked at Kenji with concern. "You don't have to play if you don't want to, Kenji." But something had changed in Kenji's face. The tears that had been forming were gone. His jaw was set with determination. He looked at Takeshi with calm, steady eyes. All the months of mockery, of being told he was wasting his time, of being poor while others had everything, all of it crystallized into a single moment of decision. "I'll play," Kenji said quietly. "Kenji," Mr. Yoshida started to protest. "It's okay, Mr. Yoshida, I want to." Kenji sat back down at the bench. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was firm. "I'll play for everyone." Takeshi's smile became triumphant. This was going to be fun. The poor kid would make a fool of himself on that broken piano, and Takeshi and his friends would have a great story to tell back at school. "Wonderful. Everyone gather around. We're going to have a concert." The children slowly formed a semicircle around the piano. Some sat on the floor. Others stood. Mr. Yoshida stood close by, ready to intervene if things went wrong. The 4 boys from the academy stood behind Takeshi, barely containing their laughter. They were already imagining how embarrassing this was going to be. The room grew quiet. Even the teenagers at the ping-pong table had stopped their game to watch. Everyone's eyes were on Kenji, the small 8-year-old boy sitting at the broken piano in his too big school uniform. Kenji's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His palms were sweating. This was different from playing alone in the corner. Now everyone was watching, judging, waiting for him to fail. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about why he loved music. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't to prove anything. It was because music was part of his soul. It was the language he spoke when words weren't enough. He thought about all the afternoons he had spent at this piano, all the melodies he had discovered, all the ways he had learned to make beauty out of brokenness. This piano wasn't junk. It was his friend, his teacher, his treasure. He opened his eyes and looked at the keys. Takeshi was right that many of them were broken. Right that the piano was out of tune. Right that a normal person would call it junk. But Kenji had never been normal. And he knew this piano like he knew his own heartbeat. The room held its breath. Even Takeshi had stopped smiling, waiting to see what would happen. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dirty windows. A train rumbled by in the distance. A car horn honked somewhere far away. Kenji placed his fingers on the keys. Every key he touched was a friend, a familiar voice in his symphony of limitations. He knew exactly which keys would respond and which would stay silent. He knew which notes would be sharp and which would be flat. He had mapped every flaw, every quirk, every possibility of this instrument. And then, in that moment of perfect silence before the music began, Kenji made a choice. He would not play carefully. He would not hold back. He would not play to avoid mistakes. He would play with everything in his heart and let the music speak for itself. His fingers pressed down on the first chord and everything changed. The first notes that came from the broken piano were soft, almost hesitant, but there was something in them. Something that made even Takeshi's smirk fade just a little. The melody was simple at first, like a question being asked in the silence of the community center. Kenji's small fingers moved across the yellowed keys with careful purpose. He started with the middle range where most of the working keys were clustered. The melody was one he had composed himself over many weeks of practice, created specifically to work around the piano's broken keys. It was a song about morning in his neighborhood, about walking past the shops, about the sounds of the city waking up. The other children leaned forward slightly, listening. Mr. Yoshida found himself holding his breath. This was different from the practice sessions he had overheard. Kenji was playing with an emotion and power he had never shown before. The melody grew more complex. Kenji's right hand climbed higher on the keyboard, carefully avoiding the dead keys like stepping stones across a river. Where a normal piano would have certain notes, Kenji substituted others that worked, creating unexpected harmonies that somehow made the song more interesting, not less. His left hand began adding rhythm, steady chords that anchored the floating melody. He had learned which keys in the bass register still produced sound, and he used them like the foundation of a building, strong and sure. The broken piano was responding to his touch, and slowly, impossibly, it was beginning to sing. Takeshi's smile had completely disappeared now. He stood with his arms crossed, but his posture had changed. He was actually listening. His friends beside him had stopped whispering. The chubby boy with glasses had his mouth slightly open in surprise. Kenji pressed deeper into the music. His eyes were closed now, and his whole body swayed slightly with the rhythm. The song changed, becoming faster, more urgent. It was like a chase through narrow streets, like rain beginning to fall, like laughter and shouts and the chaos of life all mixed together. His fingers flew across the working keys with increasing confidence. He had practiced this piece so many times that he knew every movement by heart. He knew that the D above middle C didn't work, so he used D sharp instead, creating a slightly jazzy sound. He knew that 3 keys in the lower bass were silent, so he jumped his left hand to different octaves, creating unexpected depth. The children watching forgot where they were. Yuki had tears streaming down her face, though she didn't know why. Hiroshi was nodding his head with the rhythm, completely absorbed. Even the teenagers who had been playing ping pong had gathered at the edge of the crowd, drawn by the music. Mr. Yoshida felt his own eyes growing wet. In his 15 years at this community center, he had seen many things. He had seen children learn to read, make friends, overcome fears. But he had never seen anything like this. This poor quiet boy was making music that touched something deep in the soul, and he was doing it on an instrument that should have been garbage. The melody shifted again, becoming softer, sadder. This was the part of the song about loneliness, about watching through windows at things you could never have, about dreams that seemed impossible. Kenji's fingers moved with delicate precision, drawing out every possible feeling from those damaged strings. Several children found themselves thinking about their own lives, about their own struggles, about times they felt small or forgotten or not good enough. The music was speaking to all of that pain, acknowledging it, honoring it. Takeshi stood completely still. His jaw was clenched. His hands, which had been crossed arrogantly over his chest, now hung at his sides. He had studied piano since he was 3 years old. He had played on grand pianos that cost more than cars. He had performed in recitals where wealthy parents clapped politely. His teacher was the strictest in all of Osaka, a woman who rapped his knuckles with a ruler when he made mistakes. But never, not once in all his years of expensive training, had he made music that felt like this. His playing was technically perfect. Every note was correct. Every rhythm was precise. But it was cold, empty. He played to avoid mistakes, not to express anything real. This boy, this poor kid with no training and no teacher, playing on a piano that was literally broken, was creating something that Takeshi had never achieved. And the realization was crushing. The melody climbed toward its peak. Kenji's hands moved faster now, building intensity. The music was becoming hopeful, like sunrise after a long night, like the first warm day after winter, like the moment when you realize that maybe, just maybe, dreams can come true. He used every working key on the piano, his hands crossing over each other, reaching for the highest notes that still functioned and the lowest notes that still resonated. The broken piano was singing its heart out, every working string vibrating with purpose, every hammer striking true. The supervisor from Sakura Elite Academy, the gray-haired teacher who had dropped the boys off, had returned early. She stood at the entrance to the community center, frozen in place. She had taught music for 30 years before becoming a supervisor. She had heard countless students, attended hundreds of concerts, listened to professional pianists on the finest instruments. But this was different. This was raw talent, pure and undeniable. This was what she had spent her whole career hoping to find and almost never seeing. She moved closer to the crowd, tears running down her cheeks, not wanting to disturb the performance but unable to stay away. Kenji poured everything into the final measures of his song. All the hours of lonely practice, all the dreams he kept locked in his heart, all the love he had for music that couldn't be taught or bought. It all flowed through his fingers and into the broken piano, transforming it from a piece of junk into an instrument of pure emotion. The music was building to its conclusion. The melody and the chords came together in a final expression of hope and determination. It was saying, I am here. I exist, I matter. Despite everything against me, despite all the broken pieces, I can create beauty. I can make something meaningful. I can matter. The final chord rang out in the silent community center. Kenji held it, letting it sustain as long as the damaged strings would allow. The sound gradually faded, the old piano releasing its voice slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want the moment to end. And then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Kenji's hands remained on the keys for a moment. His eyes stayed closed. His heart was beating so hard and fast that he felt dizzy. He had played everything he had. He had held nothing back. For 3 minutes he had been completely and totally himself, expressing everything he couldn't say with words. Slowly, he opened his eyes. He was afraid to turn around, afraid to see the faces of the people behind him. What if they were laughing? What if Takeshi was right and it had all been terrible? What if he had just embarrassed himself in front of everyone? The silence continued. Kenji's hands began to shake. He started to stand up, ready to run away, to hide, to disappear. Then he heard it, a single pair of hands clapping. He turned and saw Mr. Yoshida. Tears were streaming down the old man's face, running over his cheeks and dripping off his chin. His glasses were fogged up, but he was clapping, his hands coming together again and again with sharp, clear sounds that echoed in the silent room. "Bravo," Mr. Yoshida said, his voice choked with emotion. "Bravo, Kenji." And then, like a dam breaking, everyone began to clap. Yuki was crying and clapping at the same time. Hiroshi was cheering. The other children jumped to their feet, their applause growing louder and louder. The teenagers were whistling and stamping their feet. Even the janitor, who had been quietly sweeping in the corner, had stopped to listen and was now applauding with tears in his eyes. The sound was thunderous. It filled the community center like a wave, crashing over Kenji where he stood at the piano. He looked around in shock, unable to believe what was happening. They were clapping for him. They were standing for him. They were crying for him. The gray-haired supervisor from Sakura Elite Academy was clapping the hardest of all. She was nodding her head and saying yes, yes, yes over and over again. She had found what she had been looking for her entire career. Real, undeniable, pure talent. Kenji looked at Takeshi. The tall boy stood completely still in the middle of the applauding crowd. His arms hung at his sides. His face was pale. His expensive watch glinted in the light. For a long moment their eyes met. Kenji expected to see anger or mockery, but instead he saw something else. Shame, understanding, and something that might have been respect. Takeshi opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His 4 friends stood beside him, also silent, also subdued. They had come here to mock and belittle. They had come here feeling superior, but they had witnessed something that made all their expensive lessons and fancy instruments seem hollow and meaningless. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Kenji stood there, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with his hands, not knowing where to look. He had never imagined this. In his dreams, he played for audiences, yes, but those were fantasies. This was real. These were real people, really moved by his music. Mr. Yoshida walked over and put his arm around Kenji's thin shoulders. "You did it, my boy. You really did it. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in this center." "Really?" Kenji's voice was small and uncertain. "Really," Mr. Yoshida confirmed. "You have a gift, Kenji, a real gift, and everyone here knows it now." The supervisor pushed through the crowd. She knelt down so she was at eye level with Kenji. Up close, he could see that her stern face was transformed by emotion. "Young man," she said, her voice shaking, "that was extraordinary. Who is your teacher?" Kenji shook his head. "I don't have a teacher." The supervisor looked at Mr. Yoshida for confirmation. He nodded. "It's true. He's completely self-taught. He just started playing that piano 4 months ago." The supervisor stood up slowly, shaking her head in disbelief. 4 months? That's impossible. I've been teaching music for 30 years. I know impossible when I see it. But this, she looked at Kenji with wonder. This is a gift that comes once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. Takeshi finally found his voice. It came out rough and quiet. I need to say something." The crowd quieted down and people turned to look at him. Takeshi's face was red. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He looked at Kenji and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his expression. "I was wrong," Takeshi said. Each word seemed difficult for him. "I was cruel and stupid and wrong. You're not a pretender. You're real. More real than I've ever been." His voice cracked. "I've had every advantage. The best teachers, the best pianos, all the money in the world. But I've never played anything half as beautiful as what you just played. I'm sorry." His friends stared at him in shock. Takeshi never apologized. Takeshi never admitted he was wrong. But here he was, humbled by a poor 8-year-old boy and a broken piano. Kenji didn't know what to say. He had expected mockery or anger, not this. Not an apology. Not respect. It's okay, he finally said. No, it's not okay, Takeshi insisted. But maybe I can try to make it better. He looked at his supervisor. Ms. Ishida, we need to help him. He needs a real teacher. Real lessons. Ms. Ishida nodded emphatically. Absolutely. I was just thinking the same thing. She turned to Mr. Yoshida. Do you have contact information for his parents? I need to speak with them immediately. They can't afford lessons, Mr. Yoshida said gently. His family struggles just to afford the small fee for him to come here. Then we'll find a way, Ms. Ishida said firmly. This kind of talent cannot be wasted. I'll speak to my contacts. There are foundations, scholarships, programs for gifted children. We will find a way. Kenji listened to all this in a daze. Scholarships, programs, real lessons? It was too much to take in. Just minutes ago he had been terrified and humiliated. Now everyone was talking about his future like it was something precious and important. Yuki pushed through the crowd and hugged Kenji tightly. I knew you were amazing, she whispered. I always knew. Other children wanted to talk to him, to touch him, to be part of this moment. Kenji felt overwhelmed by all the attention. He looked back at the broken piano, his constant companion for the past 4 months. It sat there silent now, its work done, having given everything it had to help him shine. Thank you, Kenji whispered to the piano, though no one else could hear. The community center slowly returned to normal activity, but everything had changed. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened. By the time Kenji's mother came to pick him up, she found a crowd of people wanting to talk to her about her son. When Kenji finally walked home with his mother that evening, his legs felt shaky and unreal. His mother kept squeezing his hand, pride and worry mixing on her face. So much had happened so fast. What did it all mean? What would happen now? Kenji looked up at the darkening sky and thought about the music still echoing in his mind. He had proven something today, not just to Takeshi and the others, but to himself. He could do it. He could really do it. His dreams might not be impossible after all. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Kenji allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the music in his heart could become his future. That evening, Kenji's small apartment above the noodle shop buzzed with an energy it had never known before. His mother had tried to explain what happened at the community center, but the words tumbled out confused and excited. His father came home from the factory earlier than usual after receiving an urgent call from his wife. They sat together at the low kitchen table, the same table where bills were counted and worried conversations were held in whispers. But tonight was different. Tonight there was hope sitting at that table like an unexpected guest. Kenji tried to explain everything. He told them about the boys from the rich school. He told them about Takeshi's cruel challenge. He told them about the music that poured out of him, different and more powerful than ever before. His parents listened with wide eyes, holding hands across the table. And then everyone clapped, Kenji said, his voice still full of wonder. Even the mean boys. Even the teacher from the fancy school. Mr. Yoshida was crying. His father shook his head slowly. My son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My son did this. His mother was crying quietly, wiping her eyes with her apron. I knew you loved music, Kenji, but I never understood how special you really are. There was a knock at the door. Kenji's mother went to answer it, and there stood Mr. Yoshida with a woman Kenji didn't recognize at first. Then he realized it was Ms. Ishida, the supervisor from Sakura Elite Academy, still in her gray suit but looking somehow softer than before. I'm sorry to come to your home unannounced, Ms. Ishida said with a respectful bow, but this matter couldn't wait. May we come in? The apartment was small and humble, especially compared to what Ms. Ishida was probably used to. But she entered without any sign of judgment and sat on the floor cushion offered to her. Mr. Yoshida sat beside her. Kenji's parents looked nervous, and Kenji sat very still, not sure what was happening. Ms. Ishida looked at Kenji's parents with serious eyes. Your son has an extraordinary gift. What I witnessed today in the community center was something I have seen only a handful of times in my 30 years of music education. He has perfect pitch, natural musicality, and an intuitive understanding of composition that some pianists never achieve even with decades of training. Kenji's mother's hand went to her mouth. His father sat up straighter, trying to understand. I have spent this evening making phone calls, Ms. Ishida continued. I spoke with the director of the Osaka Youth Music Foundation. I spoke with my former colleague who now teaches at the Kansai Music Conservatory. I spoke with a concert pianist I studied with many years ago. Everyone wants to help. We can't afford lessons, Kenji's father said quietly, his voice heavy with shame. We can barely afford. Ms. Yoshida held up her hand gently. Please let me finish. I'm not here to ask you for money. I'm here to tell you that there are people who want to invest in your son's future. The Osaka Youth Music Foundation offers full scholarships to exceptionally gifted children from low-income families. Kenji qualifies in every way. The room was silent except for the sounds of the city outside and the restaurant below. What does that mean? Kenji's mother asked carefully. It means free lessons with master teachers. It means access to proper pianos for practice. It means that Kenji's talent won't be wasted because of circumstances he can't control. Ms. Ishida's voice was passionate now. It means he has a chance. A real chance, Mr. Yoshida nodded enthusiastically. I've already spoken to Mrs. Tanaka at the music store. She's agreed to let Kenji practice on her piano after school while she gives lessons to other students. Free of charge, Kenji gasped. Mrs. Tanaka's piano. The beautiful black piano he had stared at through the window for so long. He would actually get to play it. His parents looked at each other, communicating in that silent way that married people do. There was fear there. Fear of hoping for too much, fear of things they didn't understand. But there was also joy. Joy that their son might have opportunities they never dreamed possible. Why? Kenji's father finally asked. Why would all these people help us? Ms. Ishida smiled. Because your son is special. Because music is a gift that belongs to everyone. Not just the wealthy, because... She paused and looked at Kenji with warmth. Because when you see something truly beautiful and rare, you want to protect it and help it grow. Your son is that rare flower. Over the next few days, life became a whirlwind of changes. The local newspaper heard about the story and sent a reporter to interview Kenji. The reporter asked him to play the broken piano at the community center, and a photographer took pictures. The story appeared 3 days later with the headline, 8-year-old piano prodigy emerges from poverty to stun city. Kenji didn't like being called a prodigy. He didn't feel special. He just loved music. But the story spread. People in the neighborhood started recognizing him. They would smile and wave. The baker gave him free sweetbread. The flower shop lady gave his mother a bouquet. The following Monday, Kenji's mother walked him to the music store after school. Mrs. Tanaka was waiting with a warm smile. She led him to the beautiful black piano in the window, the one he had stared at for so many mornings. It's yours to use whenever you need it, Mrs. Tanaka said. I open the shop at 9 and close at 7. You can come after school and stay until closing time if you want. Kenji approached the piano like it was a sacred object. The keys were perfect, all 88 of them working and in tune. The wood was polished and smooth. When he sat on the bench, it didn't wobble. When he pressed a key, the sound that came out was pure and clear and perfect. He began to cry. All the months of working around broken keys, all the adjustments and compromises, suddenly he didn't need them anymore. This piano responded to every touch, sang every note he asked it to sing. It was like suddenly being able to see in color after only knowing black and white. Mrs. Tanaka patted his shoulder gently. Play something for me, Kenji, and he did. He played the same piece he had played at the community center, but on this perfect piano it transformed. The melody soared where before it had struggled. The chords resonated with richness and depth. Kenji could finally hear his music the way it was meant to sound, and it was more beautiful than he had imagined. Mrs. Tanaka listened with her eyes closed, nodding along. When he finished, she said simply, Yes, this is right. You and this piano, this is right. 2 weeks later, Kenji met his new teacher. Her name was Professor Sato, and she was a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She had trained dozens of successful pianists and was known for being demanding and difficult. When Ms. Ishida told her about Kenji, Professor Sato had been skeptical. Talented children were common. True genius was rare. But when she heard Kenji play, her skepticism vanished. She made him play scales, exercises, sight reading. She tested his ear by playing chords and asking him to identify every note. She gave him increasingly difficult tasks, watching carefully, looking for limitations. She found none. Or rather, she found no limitations in his natural ability. He had gaps in technical training, of course. He had developed some bad habits teaching himself. His posture needed work. His finger positions weren't always correct. But these were things that could be taught. The gift underneath that couldn't be taught. That was simply there, burning bright and undeniable. "I'll take him," Professor Sato announced. 3 lessons per week. And he must practice at least 2 hours every day. This is not negotiable. Kenji's mother worried about the practice time. "He has homework. He has chores." "Music is his homework now," Professor Sato said firmly. "This child has a gift that comes once in a generation. We cannot waste it for the sake of ordinary things. Do you understand what I'm saying? Your son could be one of the great pianists of his age, but only if we start now and only if we work hard." And work hard they did. Professor Sato was the strictest teacher Kenji had ever known. She accepted no excuses. If his hands were in the wrong position, she corrected them immediately. If his timing was off by even a fraction, she made him repeat the passage 50 times. She pushed him harder than anyone had ever pushed him. But she also recognized his gift and nurtured it carefully. She didn't try to make him a copy of classical pianists. Instead, she built on his natural creativity, teaching him theory and technique while preserving the emotional honesty that made his playing special. Kenji practiced every day after school at Mrs. Tanaka's shop. He did his homework quickly during lunch and on breaks, working efficiently because he knew piano practice was waiting. His fingers grew stronger. His understanding deepened. His music became more refined while losing none of its heart. Months passed. Then a year. Kenji's talent continued to blossom under Professor Sato's guidance. At age 9, he performed in a student recital at the Kansai Music Conservatory. The audience was small, mostly parents and teachers. But word spread quickly after that performance. A music critic who happened to attend wrote a glowing review in a national magazine. At age 10, Kenji was invited to perform in a televised concert for young musicians. Millions of people across Japan watched as this small boy from Osaka sat at a grand piano and played with maturity and emotion that seemed impossible for his age. The phone at his parents' noodle shop rang for days with calls from music schools, competition organizers, and concert halls. And Takeshi was there too, now a music teacher himself, having found his own path in education rather than performance. He caught Kenji's eye and nodded with respect and genuine friendship. Kenji sat at the grand piano that had been brought in for the concert. He looked out at all these faces, people who had been part of his journey in one way or another, and he thought about the 8-year-old boy he had been, pressing his nose against the music store window, dreaming impossible dreams. He began to play. The piece was his own composition, written over many months, telling the story of his life through music. It began with lonely, simple notes like a child tapping on window panes. Then it grew, showing discovery and joy the moment he found the broken piano. There were sections of struggle and doubt, representing the hard work and the challenges. There were bright, triumphant passages showing success and achievement. But the most beautiful part of the piece was the ending. It returned to those simple, honest notes from the beginning, reminding everyone that despite all his success and fame, he was still that same boy who loved music for its own sake. The music said, "I haven't forgotten. I will never forget." When the final notes faded and silence filled the hall, no one moved. Then the applause began, starting slowly and building into a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. People were crying, laughing, cheering. This wasn't just a concert. This was a celebration of possibility, of hope, of what can happen when talent meets opportunity and dedication. After the concert, Kenji made an announcement. He was establishing a foundation to provide free music education to children from low-income families across Japan. The foundation would provide instruments, lessons, and opportunities to any child who showed talent and passion, regardless of their financial situation. "I was lucky," Kenji told the crowd. "So many people helped me when I had nothing. Mrs. Tanaka gave me access to her piano. Professor Sato gave me her time and expertise. The foundation paid for my lessons. Mr. Yoshida believed in me. Now I want to be that person for other children. I want to make sure that no child's gift is lost because of poverty." The broken piano from the community center was moved to the lobby of his new concert hall that opened 2 years later. It stood behind glass, carefully preserved, with a gold plaque explaining its story. Thousands of visitors came to see it every year. Children would press their faces against the glass, looking at the yellowed keys and chipped wood, trying to imagine how such a damaged instrument could have started such an amazing journey. Kenji made it a tradition to play that broken piano once a year, on the anniversary of the day he performed for Takeshi and the others. He would sit at the wobbly bench and coax music from the limited keys, reminding himself and everyone watching that perfection isn't necessary for beauty. Heart is what matters. Dedication is what matters. Love is what matters. His foundation grew quickly. Within 5 years, it was operating in 20 cities across Japan. Hundreds of children received free lessons every year. Some would become professional musicians. Others would simply learn to love music and carry that love through their lives. Both outcomes were equally valuable to Kenji. One day, when Kenji was 28 and preparing for a concert tour of Europe, he received a letter. It was from a 10-year-old girl in a small town in northern Japan. She wrote about how she loved music, but her family was too poor to afford lessons. She had read about Kenji's story and wondered if maybe, possibly, she could get help from his foundation. Kenji read the letter 3 times. He saw himself in those words. That same desperate hope, that same impossible dream. He immediately called his foundation director and arranged for the girl to receive a full scholarship. But he went further. He traveled to her town himself, wanting to meet her in person. The girl's name was Aiko. She lived in an apartment smaller than the one Kenji grew up in. Her father worked on fishing boats. Her mother cleaned offices at night. But when Kenji asked Aiko to sing for him, because she had mentioned loving to sing, her voice was pure and clear like mountain water. "You have a gift," Kenji told her, kneeling down to her level. "Just like I did, and I'm going to make sure you get the chance to develop it." Aiko's eyes filled with tears. "Really, you really mean it?" "Really," Kenji promised. "I know what it's like to have a dream that seems impossible. But I also know what it's like when people believe in you and help you. Now it's my turn to be that person for you." Over the years, there were many more children like Aiko. Each one had their own story, their own struggles, their own gifts. Kenji met with as many as he could, always remembering to stay connected to the reason he started the foundation in the first place. His parents never moved from their apartment above the noodle shop, even though Kenji could have bought them a mansion. His father retired from the factory, but he still helped in the restaurant because he liked staying busy. His mother still made the best miso soup in the neighborhood. They were proud of their son, but they were proudest that success hadn't changed his heart. Professor Sato passed away when Kenji was 30. At her funeral, Kenji played a piece he had composed in her honor. It was strict and demanding, just like she had been, but underneath the discipline was profound love and gratitude. She had shaped him not just as a musician, but as a person, teaching him that true excellence requires both talent and tremendous hard work. Mrs. Tanaka closed her music store when she turned 80, but she attended every one of Kenji's local concerts until she was too frail to leave her home. Kenji visited her regularly, and sometimes he would bring a small keyboard and play for her in her tiny apartment. She would close her eyes and smile, remembering the little boy who used to press his nose against her shop window. Mr. Yoshida retired from the community center, but the organization honored him by naming their music program after him. The Yoshida Music Initiative provided instruments and instruction to community centers across Japan. At the dedication ceremony, Mr. Yoshida cried just like he had cried that day when Kenji first played for everyone. "I just gave him a place to practice," he said humbly. "He did everything else himself." But Kenji knew that wasn't true. Mr. Yoshida had given him more than a place to practice. He had given him safety, encouragement, and belief when others doubted. He had protected that broken piano when others wanted to throw it away. Small acts of kindness, Kenji learned, could change entire lives. Takeshi became one of the most sought-after piano teachers in Japan. He was known for his ability to help students find emotional depth in their playing, not just technical perfection. He often told the story of Kenji and the broken piano to his students, using it as an example that music comes from the heart, not from expensive instruments or prestigious schools. The two men remained close friends throughout their lives. Sometimes they performed together at charity concerts, their contrasting styles complementing each other beautifully. Takeshi never forgot the lesson he learned that day at the community center, when a poor boy with no training humbled him completely. As Kenji grew older and more famous, he received offers to teach at prestigious music schools around the world. But he always declined. Instead, he taught at his own foundation, working directly with children from poor families who reminded him of himself. These students, he felt, appreciated the opportunity more deeply. They understood that music was a gift, not a right, and they worked with the kind of hunger and dedication that comes from having nothing and being given a chance. On Kenji's 40th birthday, the city of Osaka held a celebration in his honor. They unveiled a statue in the park near where he grew up. The statue showed a small boy sitting at a piano, his eyes closed, his fingers on the keys, completely absorbed in music. At the base were inscribed words that Kenji himself had written. Every child deserves the chance to find their voice. Poverty should never silence a gift. During the ceremony, Kenji gave a speech. He talked about his childhood, about his parents' struggles, about the broken piano that became his teacher. He talked about all the people who helped him along the way, and he reminded everyone that his story, while unusual, shouldn't be rare. How many other children are out there right now? He asked the crowd, pressing their faces against windows, dreaming of things they think they can never have. How many gifts are being wasted because of poverty, because of lack of opportunity, because nobody is paying attention? My story is not just about me. It's about what becomes possible when we notice these children, when we help them, when we refuse to let circumstances destroy potential. The crowd applauded, but Kenji wasn't finished. I am not special, he continued. I was just a boy who loved music. What made the difference was that people cared enough to help. That's what we need more of, not just for music, but for everything. We need to see the potential in every child, regardless of their family's bank account. We need to believe in them and give them chances, because you never know which child might change the world if only someone gives them the opportunity. That speech was recorded and played in schools across Japan. It inspired other successful people to start their own foundations and programs. It started a national conversation about access to arts education for poor children.